2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm. Today we're broadcasting live from historic Founders Park in Ocean Grove, New Jersey on the Jersey Shore, and we're delighted you can join us today for our unique podcast community. We've been growing. We've just hit 404 subscribers. We're excited about that. So remember, hit that bell, hit the YouTube bell, and hit that bell for upcoming guests and information. And make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and like us on Facebook. Tell us to introduce us to your colleagues. And the more people on this call, the better. The more people on our meeting. Make sure... spread the word. We're excited to have you join us for Music Matters 2020, where we pull back the curtain and you join the conversation on some of the most important topics in music today. Today, we focus on music education, and we have a leader in the music education community. We have Dr. Brian Schneckenburger, who is someone I haven't seen in many years. I'm delighted to reconnect with. Dr. Brian Schneckenburger is currently the Supervisor of Music and Dance Education for the Baltimore County Public Schools and was previously a Coordinator of Fine Arts in Baltimore City Public Schools. Before that, he taught for 13 years in New York, Arizona, and Maryland before making the transition to music administration. And he continues to serve in leadership capacities in the state and national levels. Most recently, he was elected as president-elect of the Maryland Music Educators Association. So we're delighted to have Brian with us today. Welcome, Brian Schneckenburger.
Well, Jason, thank you for having me. It's a delight to see you after literally decades.
So I'll just put it out there. We were roommates in college at the Crane School of Music, where I did my undergraduate with Brian, and it's great to see you again after all these years.
Great to see you as well.
So tell us about your transition to music administration. Maybe go back to the beginning. Why did you decide to become a music teacher in the first place?
Sure. So I became a music teacher because I became a musician. I was still am a passionate musician, even though my trumpet currently gathers dust. I count myself as a laptop virtuoso as an administrator. But I went into music teaching. The minute I started student teaching, things clicked for me. And it was in Saratoga Springs, New York, if any upstaters are listening right now. I just fell in love with the kids. I fell in love with teaching music, and it's been a love affair ever since.
Well, certainly it's wonderful. And so you did your undergrad and your master's at the Crane School of Music, where I went as well. And what was your experience like at Crane, and how did you choose to go back for your master's there?
Sure. So my experience at Crane was phenomenal. Teaching actually seemed easy after some of the things that we went through in terms of amount of coursework, volume of coursework, intensity of coursework, and the demands placed on us as students there. I decided to go back. My first few years of teaching were in the North Country in Platt, where I also did some adjuncting as applied trumpet and performed as a trumpet player in a quintet in residence. And Crane was a logical choice. I found myself in that area and really wanted the accountability of a music education degree. It was important to me to go back to music school for that. I did a couple of summers and then went back full time. So I took a leave from my teaching position at the time, but knowing that it was really kind of time to grow and to kind of see some new perspectives. So I went back for my master's in music education, which was a great experience. It was very intimate. It really enlightened me to some of the philosophical and curricular considerations from kind of the 10,000-foot view of teaching that, my more practical undergraduate degree in music education, as well as my teaching experience at the time, had certainly lent me.
Well, so Crane certainly, for those of you who don't know, we mentioned the Crane School of Music is part of SUNY Potsdam in Potsdam, New York. And it's a great place and is a very important music education school that graduates a large percentage of the music teachers in New York State. So it's been a very strong leader in the music education field. And it's a wonderful school. So I check it out if you have students, if you want to become a music teacher, or if you have students who are looking to do that. So Brian, your teaching career before you went into administration took you to different places. What was it like teaching in different states?
So, different states have different levels of support for the arts, at the state level, which trickles down. Um, I started my first 5 years of teaching in New York State, which is one of the kind of juggernauts for music education. When we think of, organizations affiliated with the National Association for Music Education, the New York State School Music Association is one of the biggest and one of the strongest. That was wonderful. Really having worked in a couple of different rural districts within New York State, there was still an incredible amount of support for music programs, administratively, from the state level, from colleagues within County Music Educators Association. In Arizona, it was a little bit different. So in Arizona, they're heavily bought into local control. So similar to New York, the towns are kind of the districts out there. But school boards have a lot more license in terms of what they feel is appropriate for their school communities. As a result, you see some more of the choice kinds of options proliferating, such as charter schools or contract schools within districts. Particularly, let's say, like Phoenix Unified or Tucson Unified, where charters tend to work, but certainly within the outlying areas as well. If you go up toward the Navajo Reservation in the north of the state, you would see similar things as well. Back here in Maryland, I returned 14 years ago to the East Coast, and I went back to my spoiled brat upbringing. Maryland is a phenomenal arts education area. There's incredible support. So different than the other two, Maryland is county school systems, and so the school systems tend to be considerably larger. My own school system encompasses 115,000 students in 175 schools. As supervisor of music and dance education, I'm one of 3 full-time dedicated administrators within my county, and we serve roughly 350 music teachers at any given time.
Oh, it's a huge program.
Huge program, award-winning program. It's with the state support from the Maryland Music Educators Association, from which I've recently assumed the presidency. In addition to our support from the Maryland State Department of Education, our lead advocacy organization, Arts Education in Maryland Schools Alliance, we really have some phenomenal support mechanisms. But by and large, you also just really see strong upper-level administrative support within the counties in terms of their investment in arts education and what that means for our children.
Well, so tell us about, now as a music teacher, what did you specifically teach?
So a little bit of everything. Predominantly an instrumental teacher. I'm a trumpet player by trade. I make no apologies. So I was predominantly a band director at various levels. I started off with beginning. I did a maternity leave my last semester of my master's in middle school and high school. When I moved out to Arizona, I did some general music. I did a year of chorus. Don't laugh, Jay. We all survived, I'm happy to say. I did do a year of general music there, and then I took over a very small school, which was very bought in, that I was the music program. So yes, some more chorus. We put on some musicals. I had band. I started a jazz ensemble, so it was a little everything. When I moved back to Baltimore, I taught middle school and high school instrumental music pretty much exclusively.
So you've had the gamut. I think it's wonderful for someone in your position as an administrator to have been in all those different forms of the classroom and to experience that from a rural district to an urban district, from different states. I think that gives you a really great overall view of the entire industry.
Well, and I'm really fortunate to have that viewpoint, but also to have had high quality opportunities in any one of those given situations. And people can make what they want to of different settings, rural settings, urban settings. And, some people make the case that arts education is all about the money. To an extent it is. But at the same time, there were deep levels of commitment in all of those areas that really was able to inform my predisposition both in curriculum, but also to my commitment of teaching all kids, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what they look like, where they call home.
Powerful, powerful, my friend, and certainly such a noble charge. So how did you make the decision to go into administration?
So I like to say administration found me. I early in my teaching career, and I had great experiences wherever I was, but early in my teaching career, I was in a school in upstate New York that was on waterfront property. And so a lot of the problems we dealt with there were first world problems. And the most poisonous place in the building was the teacher's lounge, because you would think that nothing ever went right there. And I don't know. I go back to my days of playing football. Go ahead and laugh. But, a coach said, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And I always wanted to be part of a solution. I always wanted to be the one rolling my sleeves up and helping. And, hearing those teachers talk really informed my desire to be part of the solution, whether it was, what we were doing at the school level in terms of, programs. It didn't necessarily have to be part of the music program, but I just wanted to be one of those teachers.
That makes sense, and I think I could have seen that from an early age. Even as an undergraduate, you had that kind of attitude, that can-do attitude of roll up your sleeves, get in there, make change. That's it's great to see it come to fruition in this manner. So tell us what it's like to oversee a program with that many teachers. Tell us how many students you serve. Give me those stats again.
Sure. So our district serves slightly over 115,000 students in 175 schools.
How many music teachers?
And about 350. And I'm one of 3 full-time administrators dedicated to that.
So what is your day-to-day job? What is your day-to-day? What's an average week of what do you do? How do you divide your time with all that responsibility?
The short answer is yes. So on any given day, for example, today, and of course things have changed in the past few months, where that happens. But today I was charged with looking at and approving instrument repairs for the district. We have our contracts with our vendors, and we take a look and approve every repair that goes out during the summer. Some days I could be out supporting a teacher. Some days I could be conducting teacher interviews. Some days I could be in meeting with the principal, talking about support plans for teachers. We could be planning curriculum writing like we are tomorrow. I could be doing formal observations for teachers. Doing the work of, helping teachers improve their craft. Some days I get to pick up the stick, work with an ensemble. Those are my favorite days. I could be planning district events such as All County or our annual side-by-side concert with Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. So it's a diverse job. And any of that can change based on what the district needs or what's important at the given time.
Certainly a lot of responsibility and really steering that ship and keeping everything on course for music and the arts. And what do you? How has that changed in the last couple of weeks, the last months?
Sure. So there's been a palpable shift, and let's set aside the fact that we're not, in schools right now working with our classes in our classrooms with traditionally conceived performing ensembles from the conservatory model of chorus, band, orchestra. A large shift that I've seen is really a shift to student-centeredness. And it's kind of an exciting one. So it's not just, these students coming in that we are polishing into a product of one sort or the other based on, what our ensemble's focus is. But it's really been to how are you today? What's going on today? And really, understanding students from where they're coming from. It's that shift to working with all students. We're a very fortunate district in that we are one-to-one with devices from grades 6 through 12, and we've more or less expanded that to any kid that needs a device within our system. So we were better prepared to handle some of these things than other districts may have been. It wasn't as big upfront a financial crunch, or we weren't worried about where we're going to come up with devices if they were literally on the boat on the way from China. So it's happened. And so, we had minimal disruptions as far as that goes. But really, some of the shifts we've also seen are the shifts within the standards. So for those of us listening to the call that are not necessarily curriculum geeks or standards geeks, or maybe even music educators as such, the music standards nationally are undergirded by 4 what they call artistic processes, which are ways that people interact with the arts. And they include creating music, performing and presenting music, responding to music, and then connecting music with other learnings within the curriculum, right? Or to other aspects of our life. It could be culture, it could be history, just to name a couple. But seeing a shift, especially in the place where we haven't been able to have those performing ensemble experiences without hours and hours of editing, and I know you've fallen prey to that yourself.
Yes, I have.
So in lieu of those, we've seen shifts within our curriculum and fostered shifts within our curriculum to those other areas. And so, is it some sort of ongoing composition?
Even those
composition?
online, the virtual choir pieces, they require individuals. You become, instead of a choral ensemble singer, you become a solo singer, recording yourself and then reviewing yourself. I'm amazed by how much the people who participate in those have to become individual singers. Even some of the members of the choirs tell me, I've become much more of aware of my intonation and my intervals, and you hear every little defect, and the recording doesn't lie. So in a way, that's been an interesting process for people who've been singing on my projects, and I'm sure that my university will be dealing with some of that in the fall. We'll be doing some of the virtual choir recordings and Zoom call rehearsals, and it's a very different platform, certainly, than what we're used to as musicians and ensemble directors.
Absolutely, and who knows what the large ensemble might look like in the fall. Guidance right now says no singing, right?
It certainly does. It says we're vectors of transmission and super spreaders, and I work with opera singers most of my life, and they do project quite well. That's their whole job, their entire career is that projection, and that with it carries that's why there's going to be very little opera in the United States this year. So it's going to be a new world for us all.
Well, and as the second one down the list is a brass player, the virus can get in there and live for, numerous days at a time. So, whatever that looks like.
Isn't there a study coming out very soon? Everyone's talking about it. What fill us in? You probably right there with that.
So, our national organization, the National Association for Music Education, which used to be MENC, is contributing along with the National Federation for High School Associations, NFHS is their acronym, and they are along with numerous other organizations sponsoring an aerosol study that's being run out of the University of Colorado. Preliminary results for instruments are due out on July 6th, which is the date that they published, with vocalists and theater folks coming out a few weeks later, and keeping in mind that those are preliminary results, right? And so with the current information that we have, NAFME, the National Association of Music Education, has published some recommendations for what music education could look like in the fall. And they, again, echoed the no singing thing, but, they've also talked a little bit about high school marching band and talked about temperature checks with, at rehearsals and socially distancing. There have been some pretty scary pictures coming out of Texas of socially distanced marching bands taking the entire length of a field. And
only
so,
in Texas.
It's bigger, right?
Certainly is.
but so yeah, some of those changes, and then I was on uh, uh, presentation last week with my colleague, Dr. Harlan Parker, who's the wind ensemble director at the Peabody Institute. And he's talking about they're moving toward chamber ensembles for the entire year. And so, moving away from the large ensemble model completely in kind of a proactive move.
Very smart. I think that's I've been, my university at Seton Hall University is looking at a high flex model, but we're fleshing out what that actually means for all the disciplines now. We're all in frantically trying to, that sounds, it makes sense to start, gradually coming back to the campus in some ways. But what's that going to mean for music is really up in the air. We're discussing it. We're reviewing all the science available, certainly. And it's going to be certainly an adjustment period for everyone. How did you help your teachers in your district to adjust to the technology? Because it was so sudden. I mean, from my perspective, I was teaching my normal semester of chorus, orchestra, voice students, music ed students, and bang, we're online. So, I mean, how did it work for you guys?
So fortunately, technology has been a focus for us for a long time within the district. And so with a few exceptions, teachers made the acclimation pretty well. The other thing we did up front was to create, have some of our superstar teachers create the online lessons that were administered each week throughout the shutdown for the 10-week period between the end of when we shut down on March 16th through the end of the school year. And so we already had an online learning management system, which allowed us to administer assessments as well as virtual instruction. So we created in curriculum a framework from which those teachers could write, and that was a uniform thing that we did wide. And so then it was really turning our superstars loose after that, and really looking at what the critical curricular content areas were and what commonalities they might share. And then thinking about those most important pieces of curriculum that we needed to address for those kids, walking out the door last week.
Wow. Yeah, it's certainly, we're seeing a creative explosion. I've been on the show, everyone I've interviewed, this is the 11th episode, we've had artists who are doing really great work, whether it's my friend Christina Major, who's the toilet paper diva. She sang Teatro Cologne, Norma, 2 seasons ago, and now she's making videos of her with toilet paper headdresses, and 61,000 people on YouTube were laughing, and 500,000 people on Facebook Live, and just humor, and we're seeing so many people doing such creative things, and teachers I'm glad are stepping up because the students need a sense of normalcy. They need a sense of of a normal life while this is all going on.
Absolutely. And to that end, our district, we had synchronous instruction each day. So for example, I'm the dad to a couple of our students in the district, an outgoing third grader and a first grader. So they'll be in fourth and second, and I'll have one in kindergarten next year. But so they all had daily meetings face-to-face like you and I are having right now with their teachers to check in. Initially, it was just to check in. So little background, the Maryland governor shut everything down for 2 weeks, just said that everything shut down. And then, of course, that's when supervisors jump into action and we we figure out what's going to happen afterwards. But after that, really the next week or so was just checking in on people and seeing who is showing up, who isn't showing up, who to contact. And our building administrators were unbelievable in terms of getting kids back engaged with that. Let's have synchronous meetings every day with their homeroom teachers, and then they had their weekly specials time as well. So, sessions generally ranged half an hour to 45 minutes. And then they had coursework to do outside of that. And so they were able to keep up with that. The really interesting thing is, of course, then parents became homeschool teachers, including myself. I have a doctorate in music education, but I found myself teaching. So it's not the same.
We all adapt in these times. It's amazing how much we can learn and how much we can do when we're presented with these unique set of challenges.
Absolutely. And so districts, responded to those things in different ways.
I have a question from Phil from Louisiana for our first question from our audience today. What advice do you have for teachers who may be at districts who are not so technologically advanced? How can teachers help their communities?
Sure. So first thing I do is to continuously dialogue with your building administrator, because those are the folks that are probably generally disseminating any of the work that's going home. And so just really asserting yourself into that conversation of, all right, well, I've got some stuff that I'd really like to send home to keep the kids engaged as well. And so it's just a matter of really remaining part of that conversation.
And how do you keep? How does your district keep students? I know that I've heard from other teacher colleagues that throughout the country. I've been seeing this on message boards and from colleagues, some of my former students at the university, that only not a large percentage of the students were responding to their music work, to their arts work, to their How do you respond to something like that? There's a percentage of students who aren't meeting their artistic goals. How do we reach out to those students?
One-on-one as best you can. Our again, first world problems. We have our learning management system, and we can reach directly out to students that way. Again, maybe it's depending on your grade level, getting in touch with those homeroom teachers, or collaborating with other teachers to see what good contact information they have for home, and just checking in. And really not necessarily coming from a standpoint of you're not doing your homework, which you're not. But at the same time, really engaging them as people in kind of non-judgmental ways, saying, all right, well, this is another way that you could think of things, right? And so if you need anything, let me know. And it's also just, it's the old school proximity thing. Like if the teacher's standing over your shoulder a little bit, then, you may tend to do that. And so that's one possibility.
Yeah, I think the one-to-one correspondence is huge, just reaching out to people. I when it first came down, when we separated, a lot of my students at the university were hurting, and a couple of them were not on the calls, they were not part of the rehearsals, so I did have to reach out and to see what was going on, and they needed a little more time, they needed a little more space, they were trying to process incredible amounts of societal turbulence and distress, and it's our job to get them back on track and to get them, to meet them as people before we can teach them music.
Absolutely, and that's one of those times when a teacher can stand up and just say I care without even necessarily having to say it, right? I taught a grad class in instrumental methods at Towson University this past semester, and pretty much as soon as shutdown started, hard deadlines stopped, right? And so projects or anything, it's just really that check-in of whether it's an email. It also happened that a couple of the students in the class were teachers that I oversee. So interesting times with that too. But it's just that reach out, and it's making sure that they know that as people first, we care about them, and then worrying about what comes next.
Good points. We have another question from the audience. Eve from New York, a frequent guest, says she was asking what you thought about some of the efforts to defund music and arts programs that are in the news these days. What have you heard, and what's your reaction as a leading music administrator?
Sure. So right now, again, I count myself among the spoiled. Our district has held the line on all of that for this year. Our budget is maintenance of effort, which means nothing more, but it also means nothing less. In terms of defunding programs, again, it's staying at the forefront. And in New York, you've got that phenomenal advocacy organization. I happen to know that Dr. Brown, who's currently the NISMA president, is also sitting on the reopening committee for the state. And so, you would hope that they stay front and center. Unfortunately, some districts, and in New York, it's town to town. So budgets are small to begin with. And in times when they have to, make those difficult decisions, we start hearing PE and arts and things on the front end of that conversation. the thing that I would say about that is, one, remain part of that conversation, but two, also approach it from the standpoint that as humans, children still need music and arts as part of their education to fulfill their social emotional needs, in addition to whatever curricular mandates may be in place from a given education department or board of education. And so it's really about students as feeding students as human beings and not just filling their heads.
Yes, of course, art and math and science, all these, I'm always amazed by the impact music has on students. I teach non-majors as well as majors, and I've in my career I've taught public school. I did 1 year of middle school and 6 years of high school, and a little bit of elementary mixed in there too. And the impact of the arts is not just to create musicians; it's to create well-rounded and people who can engage with their emotions. It's a powerful art form, and we have to make sure that that we are advocates for it at all times.
100%. And the other note that I would say here is that federal law, which state law has to be aligned to, currently under the Every Student Succeeds Act, says exactly that music and the arts are part of a well-rounded education. So we're talking about the whole person again. So Jay and I are both old enough to remember that that's how it started in our teaching careers in the late 90s. But now that we're back to this idea that the whole person is worthy of educating and not just the bubble tests in reading and math.
And the ancient Greeks were right with their quadrivium, saying that music was one of the essential arts up there with the rest. So way to go, ancient Greeks, right being right. You know, we go back to the classical reference that the music is central and core, and we have to keep fighting that fight. As an opera conductor, I made a lot of that case of not to cut the arts, of being an advocate for the art form, but it's even more essential in the schools to keep it strong. We've had in New Jersey a major, pretty large-sized university, Keene University, cut their art, music, and drama programs. And as an effort to deal with the rising budget issues that universities are facing. And I think it's incredibly short-sighted. To cut programs like that drastically.
Yeah, and not to be the canary in the coal mine here, but the real crunch, from what I understand, will not be this fiscal year, but next fiscal year. So 2021, 2022. When we really feel the economic impact of what's going on now. So budgets are more or less set at this point for next school year. But, school systems with smaller budgets, also have less to work with right now. Our county government came back and asked our superintendent to trim an additional $20 million from our budget. That'd be devastating for our budget is $1.8 billion. So $20 million, relatively, we did it. We did it more or less without harming, school buildings. But at the same time, that would be a much more significant amount in a much smaller district.
You'll feel that pinch much more as we have to make those difficult decisions. As administrators and leaders like you have to make those decisions. Becomes very challenging, and I wish you the best as you approach that, and as you continue to meet the needs of your large community in Baltimore County. So what else can you tell me about? So what have you learned in this period of COVID-19? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about your family, and how are you balancing your family work? I know you have 4 children, the same as I do, but you have younger ones. But tell me about how you're balancing your life these days.
So we can laugh about that, right? Balance. Actually, it's been wonderful, and a few more gray hairs, but I'm fortunate in that my district also understood that people in schools and offices were also playing teacher to their children, so they were very flexible. In terms of our work hours, in terms of, what their expectations were for us, in an atypical situation. difficult to stomach when things first shut down. As president-elect at the time of Maryland Music Educators, we had to make some extremely difficult decisions about the programs that we had to cancel, which included the cancellation of most of our all-state experiences for high school. 5/8 of those experiences, as well as our annual teachers conference. And so, that hit me personally as well as professionally, because it's one of my favorite times of year. I get to catch up with people from across Maryland that I don't normally see, folks that I see nationally at conferences as well. It also killed most of the festivals and extracurriculars that my office pushes in terms of adjudicated assessments for middle school, in terms of concerts that we look forward to each year. One of the things that we have in my county is an outstanding steel pan culture, and all the steel pan programs get together once a year and do a big concert, and that's a favorite.
Tell us what that is. A lot of our listeners might not know what that is. What's a steel pan festival?
Steel pan, so steel drums. And so, many of our high schools and middle schools have steel drum ensembles, and they rehearse and perform. They're great PR mechanisms for schools. Most of them are extracurricular, although we just wrote our steel drum curriculum. And so as a plug-in to instrumental music, so thinking of broadening that scope as well. And each year we take over the gym at one of the local community colleges, and we have about a 2-hour concert that leaves you deaf at the end of the night. And it's just a great time. But so we lost a lot of those kinds of experiences as a result of that. I say that because while experiencing that kind of professional loss of some of those things, I gained a lot of time with my own kids. Most of them only know me as an administrator, and so they know that Dad's gone a lot. It takes a lot of hours, outside of the home, and fortunately at this point they're still always glad to see me when I come home. But I've really gotten that opportunity to spend time with them and get to know them in ways that I was missing, and I'm grateful for that. I have a new appreciation for what my wife does on a daily basis as she's home with them. And so I'm very, very fortunate with that.
Well, you've certainly, it's amazing what we can do when we're forced to do it, and to things we are learning and adapting to, and how families have adapted. And I was supposed to be in Europe, 4 different countries in a month, and all of them were canceled. So now I'm home, and I'm like, me and the kids, and we have 4 children who are very talented, and we're saying, what can we do? So we came up with the idea of doing this podcast, and my son does all the technology work. My daughter designs the logo and does the graphics, and they're all 4 of my kids are involved. And it's just been such an interesting process, because I don't know anything about technology. So my son has been just holding his head saying, okay, give me the microphone, figuring out how to do it. And it's amazing what we can do when we're home with our kids, and it gives you an appreciation for who these people are, and very important.
Doing a fantastic job, by the way, Quentin.
We're at the whims of the internet in these type of calls, and the internet has been very kind today. We have a question. Yes. I don't have a name, but do you ever recommend for any online music programs for K through 5, i.e. Music Play Online or Quaver?
Ooh, okay. So the major players, so I'll say it that way because, so in my district, we use Music Studio, which used to be Spotlight on Music, which is fabulous. And our district contracts with them. Quaver Music's also a major player in the game. Strongly suggest contacting them. They're great, especially in the try me phase. And so they really give an idea of what the full complement of that program could be. So in terms of kind of a program, a curricular program that would help you as a curriculum resource, I think that's great. The note I want to say on technology, and it's in a virtual setting, it's in a classroom setting, it's a great tool. And a recent former superintendent said, it can make a good teacher great, and it can make a bad teacher work. It's really all in how you use it. I really suggest to that caller to explore and figure out really what resonates with them and then what resonates with kids. Because at the end of the day, you have to administer the tool. But if the kids aren't, it's not resonating with them, then it's not going to be valuable for your teaching.
Inspiration coming from a teacher, technology does not replace that. It can enhance that, but it can certainly, the teacher is the critical point of contact there, certainly. So as we get to the end of our interview, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, Brian, and so great to hear your thoughts on these topics. What advice do you have for people just coming up in the music ed field, from people who are older like us?
First of all, I also kind of wanted to address the idea of, the current time and adaptability, old dogs learning new tricks. But, it's also in how you kind of look at it, right? So you mentioned your friend who's wearing paper hats and singing opera to her heart's content and doing some pretty creative things. Yes, the kind of the going away right now temporarily of our performing ensembles, but is it an opportunity to look at it in a new way, right? So my advice is the same. It's explore, it's dig in, it's dive in, right? Every day I'm trying to figure something out new. There's so many free resources now in terms of virtual conferences, right? I think there's might have been one today that I missed. But so all the time there are new resources going up about teaching in a virtual environment. I know one of the places that I draw on heavily is a Facebook group called Music Teachers in Remote Learning or Designing Remote Learning or something like that. And some really phenomenal, and it's kind of being watched and posted to by some of the people who live in the virtual music education world and the technology world. And so you're going to get some high quality information there. So just dig in, explore, push some buttons, and figure out how it works. But honestly, I had to do that with Skype today because my work has been Microsoft Teams and Zoom and Google Meet, and so just, hey, how is this different, right?
Subtly different. They're all subtly different, very, very slightly.
That they are.
Enough to ruin a call if you don't do a test beforehand.
Absolutely.
We've discovered that the hard way. Yeah, it's amazing the platforms that we're engaging. I use Blackboard Collaborate in school, Teams. I use Zoom for my outside organizations, and I think it's going to be an interesting year to come. But with creative people, creative solutions emerge. And like yourself, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we wish you all the best as you keep music alive in the hearts of thousands of people and young minds and the teachers who serve them. So I want to thank you so much for being a part of the show, and I look forward to seeing you again before next 20 years.
Sounds good. We'll be pushing 70 by then. But thank you so much for having me on and for the conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and hope your listeners have gained a lot.
How can people learn more about your work and maybe your school district, and how can they find out more about you?
Sure. So probably the shortest route is going to be to Google Baltimore County Public Schools Office of Music. My information will pop up right on there as a contact. You could also Google Maryland Music Educators Association. I currently serve as president of that organization. And you can also check out our virtual conference, July 16th through 17th, which is going to focus on teaching in an online community. But we're having some wonderful keynote speakers, as well as some guest presenters and some breakout sessions and idea sharing sessions as well, with people who are just leading this work both in Maryland and nationally.
Well, it sounds like an exciting time to be involved, and people can check in, and people like you will lead the charge. And that's a good thing. We're out there. We have people at the helm who are doing the job with integrity and with hard work. So thank you, Brian, and I look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you, and thank you for giving a voice to this as well.
All the best. Thank you for tuning into Music Matters 2020. It's a pleasure that you could join us today. Remember, hit that subscribe button on YouTube right below and hit that bell for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. On Thursday, we have a virtuoso violinist. We have Nathan Meltzer, who is one of the rising stars in the violin world, who is going to join us, and you're not going to want to miss that. He plays a Stradivari violin and is one of the leading young artists in his generation. Also, like us on Facebook and just tell your friends about us, and I look forward to having you join us on our next episode. Thank you so much. Keep music alive, folks.